Great. As I said, thank you all so much for joining us as we look to talk about life after Chatham. I know, can you believe it, right? Believe it or not, within the next year and a half, you'll be looking at life after Chatham, and we're so excited for you, and we want to help you with planning for that. So today's webinar is specifically talking about the college planning process, and again, geared towards our junior students and their parents and guardians. That way we can help you with this process, but again, mainly our students. I know the new year just started, 2021 just kicked off, and it's kicked off in some real style, obviously. So we want to make sure we're taking advantage of that as we get started and move forward, and help guide you all appropriately as we start to have these types of conversations. So this again is a live stream webinar. I am recording this presently, so I'll be able to send this out once we're done in case you need to rewatch, or if maybe folks who weren't able to attend this live with us. I also am always available via email. I'm in my office if you are an in-person student as well, in A110. We'll talk about that at the end, but let's get started. So for juniors, one of the big parts of kicking off your planning of life after Chatham is focusing on your junior conference. So we're really going to be thinking about your plans post CHS. We're going to review your progress to date. And this is not a presentation, excuse me, a meeting that your parents or guardians are encouraged to attend as well. So this will take place between you and your school counselor. And it's going to be the most important resource because it's specialized and personalized to who you are as an individual and what your experience has been and your story has been so far. These will start in February. So in the next couple weeks, you'll start getting emails, parents and guardians, and then also students will get emails asking you to sign up for your junior conference. So definitely encourage you to do so. Again, it's where you get the best information that's most suited to you and kind of really helps you kick off your process. In order to prepare for your conference, we'll send more information about this. Like I said, everything is sent via email these days, so you'll get more of the information in a short while. But one of the important things is to complete the game plan survey. I will show folks on our Navigating Naviance webinar that on Friday, but basically this is just an overview of what you currently are thinking about doing after Chatham. That way your counselor can have this done ahead of the conference, or you can have this done for your counselor ahead of the conference. That way they can be the best prepared to chat with you about what you're thinking about doing and maybe catering the meeting best to you. We're going to have you thinking about or adding list of schools that you're considering. You're going to be using the colleges I'm thinking about section on Naviance to add those schools. One of the reasons we ask you to do this is that you can add schools that maybe you're interested in. That can spark some thoughts from your counselor. They can add some more schools. So they're going to help you with creating that list. And then if you have taken any test scores, we know testing has been quite a process this school year. I have a bunch of slides on that. Don't worry, we'll talk about that shortly. If you have taken a test, that will be great to have those scores so we can talk about that with your counselor. But if you haven't taken that, it's still plenty early. Again, I'll go over that shortly. So that's the junior conference. That's really what kicks off our conversation about post-CHS, any conversation, not just college, but again, this webinar is specifically for the college process, so that's what we're going to be spending our time on the most. So speaking of college, it's important to go over that there are two different types of colleges when we talk about the college process. So the first is the most common at Chatham in particular. We see a large percent of our students are applying to what we call traditional four-year colleges or universities. And that's great if that's a great match for you. And basically the other option that some of our students consider would be a county college or a community college. So I want to break down those two just real quickly to just help give you an idea of what might be the best option for you. So first of all, the traditional four-year colleges or universities, that's where you're getting a bachelor's degree, which is a more advanced degree that many of our young employees have in order to participate in the jobs that are currently available on the market or ones that are most sought out after. At a county college, you can get an associate's degree, which takes 2 years, and that is more of a foundational degree. So oftentimes students will get their associate's degree, and then they'll put those credits towards getting their full bachelor's degree. One thing I want to note is that we say traditional four-year college or university. That has been kind of the common term and what we use across the board. but completing a college or university doesn't necessarily take 4 years. It's not 4 years and you're magically done, right? It's 4 years for some people. Some people it takes 4.5 years, 5 years, 6 years. It depends on the program you apply for and are accepted to. It depends on maybe your personal life situation. Maybe you have to take a semester off. Maybe an international pandemic comes into the mix, right? And changes your plans. So just because we say 4 years doesn't mean that it takes only 4 years. So just keep that in mind as we're moving forward. There are, as we also say, colleges or universities. We sometimes use those interchangeably, but they do actually mean different things. So a college traditionally is a school. It's usually like a liberal arts college, not necessarily, but generally it focuses on undergrad programs. So usually a smaller school with undergraduate programs only, while a university is usually a larger system, and it generally has graduate and master's degree programs as well. So it does depend. I mean, you see big schools. Some universities are big, like Rutgers University, right, or huge state schools. And then you see smaller schools like Princeton University. While it's not huge, it's still considered a university. So it does depend on the offerings that they have. And then there is a difference between public and private schools. So I put two logos here. As I mentioned before, Rutgers is our big kind of state flagship public school. That's a public college. There's plenty of them across the board. Every state has them, right? And so the public schools are based on funding that comes from their state. So that's really kind of the differentiation. And a private school, they kind of work on their own. So they have their own private financing and they work separately. So for example, Seton Hall is a private school. Public versus private does not mean better versus worse, or it's not pinning them against each other. It's what works best for you. There are excellent public schools and there are excellent private schools. It's, again, just what is the best fit for you, which we'll talk about in a couple slides. But do know there is a difference between those. The most common difference is for you as a New Jersey resident, for anyone who is technically a New Jersey resident. If you apply to a New Jersey state school, when you apply for financial aid, you'll be able to apply for federal aid, but you'll also be able to apply for state aid. So New Jersey might be able to give you some financial aid towards your schooling if you went to a New Jersey state school, such as Rutgers. That's further down the line, but again, just want to break that down for you a little bit. And again, at a traditional four-year school, there are specific admission requirements. So at a county college or a community college, like the County College of Morris, that is called what is something that we call open enrollment. It means as long as you've graduated from high school and you have your high school degree, you are accepted at the school. For a traditional four-year college or university, that's not the case. There are those specific admission requirements, which again, that's something you'll do more in the summer in your senior year. And we'll go through that whole process there. So I want to spend a little bit more time on the county college piece here. Like I said, that's where you can get an associate's degree. But one really common myth with a county college is individuals think they have to go for 2 years, that they have to get that associate's degree. And you certainly do not have to. I put down there a 2+2 program. Basically, that's one of our more common that we're seeing students do across the board. It's you spend 2 years at a community college and you're getting the credits towards a bachelor's degree, and then you're transferring and spending the 2 years at a university or a four-year college. And those 4 years equals a bachelor's degree. So we commonly call that a 2+2 program, which is a great option. I'm not sure if you can see, if you need to zoom in a little bit on the image that I have here from USAA. They break down kind of what the cost would look like overall for 4 years if you decided to do the 2+2 program, or if you decided to do a full 4 year. Again, this is very general. It doesn't apply to you. Everyone's circumstances are different. But I like this image because it really nicely lays out the big cost savings in terms of taking courses at a local county or community college. A lot of students will take the beginning of their courses at a county or community college. One, because again, it's much cheaper. Two, maybe they don't know what they want to study, so they don't want to spend all that money and time at a larger or traditional four-year school trying to figure that out. And then another really great option for individuals is sometimes perhaps high school isn't the best learning environment for you. Maybe you don't work super well waking up at 7:40 every morning and working all the way through the school day, right? And maybe you need to get some more flexibility in your school schedule, and that will allow you to be a stronger student. So a lot of students will go to county or community college and they'll see that their grades increase drastically. And so let's say a student who had a 2.8 GPA at Chatham High School, their options to apply to colleges or universities were much smaller. But let's say they went to the county or community college their first year post CHS, and they were able to get a 3.8 GPA. Their options to apply to colleges are even greater, right? So sometimes that can be a really great benefit. It just gives you extra time to mature and sometimes find a better school system and schedule that works best for you. So both of these options are great. The options, the county college option, County College of Morris, is our local county college. It's a wonderful resource. I've been to campus many times. It's bigger than some college campuses, and it's a really great option for individuals. We saw some alumni choosing to do that, particularly because of COVID, knowing that their campus experience would be very different this past fall. So it can be a great option for you, but it also requires less intensive application procedures and not as much of a search process. So for the sake of this presentation, as we move on, we're going to talk mainly about that traditional college or university process. So no matter what, no matter where you're applying, right? County college, this is important, but even especially for colleges and universities, we want to talk about telling your story. So as an admissions counselor, I used to be an admissions counselor myself, and when I read an application, I always wanted to know who was this student, right? There aren't so many opportunities to know that. Unfortunately, there is a lot of the demographic information, test scores, GPA, and there are essay portions, and that's where we want to get to know you and where you want to tell your story. That's a big part of it. Another part of it is through things that you've been doing in high school and all the other things that kind of just make the book of you, right? So your courses are one of those first things that help tell the story. I'd love to see a student that has an interest in science and maybe they tried anatomy, right? And they're applying. And they also found courses that were appropriate, see that underlined, for them. It reflected their career goals, but also you were at the right academic level. We don't want to see, admissions counselors don't want to see a student who's getting a D in AP psychology. They'd rather see a student that's getting an A in a standard level course, maybe sociology, right? So it's important to talk with your teachers and talk with your counselors about what the right and appropriate class level is for you, because that does end up telling your story and plays a big part of that. Your extracurricular activities are also an important part of this, of course, so how you spend your time outside of school. This doesn't mean I'm the president of 5 clubs. It just means that you're involved in a couple clubs. Maybe you play a sport. Working is super important. People don't always think that that's important to add. It's very important. It shows you have a level of maturity and that people put trust in you, right? So again, like I said, how you spend your time outside of school, not playing video games and sleeping, but things that might be important, volunteering, anything along those lines. Test scores, again, like we said, if you have SAT or ACT tests, those can be an important part of telling your story. Not everyone thinks that test scores are the best representation of who they are. I definitely didn't think so when I was in high school. I thought I was a much better student than the score I got, right? And so that really is the case sometimes. Not everyone can test well sitting in a gym for 3 hours, especially with masks on now, right? So we'll talk more about that. A lot of tests have been test optional, or schools have been test optional. Letters of recommendation are an important part of telling your story. These are letters that we ask you to ask your teacher by the end of junior year. We will remind you, don't worry, that you're going to want to start thinking about some teachers who you think would be able to write kind, nice things about you and be able to help tell your story. So generally speaking, that's a teacher who knows you well, maybe a teacher you were able to hopefully connect with virtually or in person this year, a sophomore year teacher you were able to connect with last year as well. But I think we're going to have to be flexible with that this year, as we know the school schedule, the last half of last year, most of this year has been very different than what we're used to. So speaking with your counselor is going to be important. Myself, we can help figure out who the right people are to help you, to help write letters of recommendation for you and have you accepted to schools. We usually say that you ask for 2 letters of recommendation, and your counselor will also write a letter of recommendation for you. That is not included in the 2, so you'll get 3 automatically. But Again, we'll talk more about that to start asking your teachers by the end of the school year. Experiences and accomplishments, any things that you think are great that you want to highlight. Maybe you got your gold award, or maybe you were employee of the month, something along those lines. Even if you think it's small or silly, it's probably not. Add it on there. It's important because it's a part of telling your story. Each school will definitely ask for an essay. Most schools have one general essay that has different prompts that they'll ask you to. You can choose from 6 prompts, one prompt you want. One of those prompts usually is tell us anything about yourself, which is really nice. So you will have an essay portion, and then some schools do ask for additional essays. The most common one is, why do you want to go to Penn State? Or what do you find the most impressive about West Virginia University, right? So there's going to be specific essay questions. University of Chicago, they sometimes ask really crazy questions like, if you could be a color, what color would it be and why? So you sometimes find some fun ones, but it is some extra work. But these are really important things because they help you just really embellish on your story, right? So it gives you an opportunity to share more about who you are and outside of just numbers and data about who you are. And some schools will offer interviews. It's not very common, but some schools do, and that's a great opportunity for you to obviously share who you are and get to know the school. A lot of interviews have been happening, as with everything, over Zoom these days. All right. So when we talk about the college search process, we talk about where do you start, right? And we know that not everyone has an imaginary list of schools in their head already. It's okay to not have any schools in mind. Oftentimes, individuals start by hearing from other people. Maybe you know friends who go to a certain school, or someone mentioned to you that you might be a good fit at a certain school. So just starting to compile that list is going to be helpful and a good place to start in the beginning. Where we are as juniors, we're exploring, right? We're trying to figure out things that we like individually, we would want personally out of a school, because not only is going to school academically important, yes, because you're going to college for a degree, but you have to be socially and emotionally happy there as well. So if that doesn't happen, if you aren't, then guess what? Your grades are probably going to go down. We want to make sure that everything balances out nicely so that not only are you academically happy and have a good fit there, but also socially and emotionally happy there as well. So something we talk and you'll hear a ton about is called determining fit. So we want to determine if a school might be a good fit for you. And what that means is basically a good fit is a school that matches you as a person across different dimensions. So not just that your GPA is the same GPA that they accept, it's also that it's in a city and that's where you want to go to school, or it has a certain school size. So you want to think about things that you may like. So do you see yourself in a city? I know myself, when I was looking, cities overwhelmed me. I love them now, but as a senior in high school, I couldn't imagine going to school in a city. So that was important to me. So that ruled out every single city college, right? So thinking about those different types of things, the size of the college, so whether you want it to be super, super big, or do you kind of like what Chatham feels like with about 1,400 students? So keeping that as a frame of reference. Thinking about the fields of study, believe it or not every college has every major. So you want to make sure that, let's say you have a couple of majors in mind that you might like, that you want to check that the schools on your list offer that or offer something like that, right? I've heard from students sometimes that they get to a school and they decide, you know what, I want to major in education. And guess what? That school doesn't have an education major or a school, so they have to transfer. So it's important to look into those things. That does not mean that you need to pick a major, sign, seal, and commit to it. It just means that if you have some things in mind that you might like, you should definitely keep those in mind as you're exploring. And then social factors are important too. If you've ever dreamed of maybe being in a club, a fraternity, a cappella, government, like you want to make sure they have something like that there. Finding out if a school has a lot of commuters at the school. They call those backpack schools, students that go for during the week, but they pack up their backpack and head home over the weekend. So finding out all those different types of things are going to be important. We'll give you resources in your junior conference, and there are so many sites online, which we'll continue to send you as well. And I'll show you our college website for Chatham specifically that I've worked on. That way you can kind of start looking at those types of things. So not only when we're looking at the list of schools, we want to also make sure we manage our expectations. So the college admissions process can be hard to predict sometimes, but there are elements and there are data points that we can use to help us identify what would be an appropriate school to help manage your expectations on whether or not you'll get into that school. Again, we don't have a magic ball. We can't tell for sure that you will get in, but we can kind of make some assumptions using data. So we talk about building a healthy list, and a healthy list is a healthy range of schools. So that's having a mix of likely schools, target schools, and reach schools. A likely school is a school, pretty self-explanatory, right? That your chances are highly likely for being admitted to the school. So basically, your test scores and your GPA exceeds the general accepted student profile at that school. Sometimes people call them safety schools. We don't really like to use that word in the counseling department because, you know, nothing's truly like a safe thing, right? So that's what we kind of say likely. Everything is crazy in college admissions, you never know. Usually having at least 1 to 2 schools in this list is recommended. A target school, again, self-explanatory, is where you meet most of the application criteria. You're pretty much within the range of accepted SAT or ACT scores, your GPA, and this is generally the meat of your list. It's usually you have about 3 or 4 schools in your list in that regard. And then a reach school is, as you probably know, your profile is on the low end, but maybe you have a strong interest in that school. You love where it's located. They have a great major, and you just want to give it a shot. That's something, again, just managing your expectations that they can be difficult to get into. Usually, again, about 1 or 2 schools on a student's list in this regard too. Now, there's a category not on here that one of our counselors coined, which I really like. It's called lottery school, and it kind of is becoming more common. And basically, that the chances of getting into this school is almost like winning the lottery, because some of these schools are just so uberly competitive. Harvard, Princeton, Yale, you know, all the ones that we hear all the time in movies and on TV. But it's important to manage your expectations and pairing those with reach schools and lottery schools to kind of make sure you're having a healthy list of target and likely schools. The reason why we make this healthy list is we want to make sure you have an understanding that come April, May, March, February, maybe even earlier, once you start hearing decisions, you're getting more acceptances than you are getting denials. So again, it's all about managing expectations. It's not limiting, it's about just managing those expectations and making sure you're meeting the needs of your of you as a student. We have a tool on Naviance. It's called Scattergrams. I will show that in the Navigating Naviance webinar as well, and it's already accessible on Naviance if you have access to it. That can help you with this information. Basically, it's a plot point that tells data about how students from Chatham High School, how they've done at certain schools. So I can look at the scattergram for Penn State again, and I can see that students, I can see all the students that were accepted and what GPA and test scores they had. That's going to help me realize what school might be a target school, a likely school, a reach school. So that, again, will show in the Navigating Naviance webinar, so we can go more in depth. This can be a lot of information, so we wanted to split it up into 2. So when we talk about thinking about things that we like with our list, managing our expectations, creating a healthy list, you sometimes end up with a nice kind of a balanced list, but I like to show this graph, or not graph, this visual to kind of show you how you can visually get an idea of where you might fall as a likely target or reach school. So basically, this isn't something you have to do for all your schools. I'm a very visual person. I think this can be very helpful. One of our counselors worked on this. It can be very helpful to kind of just show students what you can really be looking at to help you make the decision on what likely target and reach is. Let's say you don't have scattergrams or you don't like it. At the bottom of this display here, I have me as a student, which is a GPA of 3.8 and an ACT of 28. And so I'm interested right now in the University of Rhode Island, UVM, Vermont, Johns Hopkins, and Villanova. So I put those 4 schools out, and I've identified those each as likely target and 2 reach schools. And the way I figured that was below the blue arrow here, I typed in the average GPAs, average ACT scores, because I took the ACT, and the average acceptance rate of those schools. And so, for example, URI is a likely school for me because its average accepted student has about a 3.5 GPA and a 25 ACT. And my personal profile is above that, right? So that helped me identify that as a likely school. Johns Hopkins and Villanova both were reaches, given the ACT scores, most particularly. With Villanova, the GPA is well above where I'm at, and the acceptance rate is something to really consider. So as you can see, the average GPA that Johns Hopkins is reporting is a 3.8, which is great. That's what I have, right? But their ACT average is higher, and their acceptance rate is also much lower. So these are things to kind of keep in mind, that we can use data like this from websites. Naviance has all this data, which is actually where I pulled it from. So you don't have to be searching all over for it, to help you kind of make the decision of, yeah, that's probably a likely target or reach school. And while we don't do this every time, this is pretty much the process we're doing in our heads when we're working with you on helping you identify that, us as counselors. Okay, I like to show these slides every year just to give you an idea of what the class looked like last year. And so the thing I like to highlight the most, this was our class of 2020 college application counts and acceptances. And you can see that we had a few students that applied to over 20 schools. We certainly don't recommend that, but everyone's process is different, so we understand and we help you with what works best. I like to highlight that the most important section, in my opinion, is that we had 115 students apply to 5 to 9 schools. Us in the counseling office think that's a very appropriate number of schools to be applying to. Number one, that means those are schools you're probably very intentional about going to and attending, right? Because you can only go to one, right? So we like that this list likely has more schools that they're very much interested in. The other thing we like is that you're seeing 65%, they had a 65% acceptance rate. So not only were there less schools on their list, but they were probably more intentional with identifying and managing their expectations too, with creating their healthy list. So they had a higher acceptance rate. Same goes for those who applied to 1 to 4 schools. They had a 68% acceptance rate. So the more schools you apply to doesn't mean the more acceptances you're going to get, okay? So don't pull your hair out applying to 30 schools. We see that many students who applied to maybe 7 schools were met with a good amount of success with their target and likely schools, and possibly some reaches. And then the other slide I like to show with the class of 2020 is that this is the breakdown of our class from last year and their GPA distribution. I know, especially at Chatham, sometimes it might sound like everyone has a 6.7 GPA. I know that's not a thing, but it sounds like it probably, right? But I like to show this because you can see the majority of the class last year, 163 students, had between a 3.0 and a 4.0. So 52% of the class were between that 3.0 and 4.0. Not everyone has to have a perfect A, like I said, a 6.7 GPA to be accepted. The colleges are out there for everyone, and that's why it's so important to find the right fit. So maybe if you don't have that perfect straight A GPA, don't be discouraged. There are schools out there that are being accepted, students are thriving, and they're really enjoying it. So I like to show just, again, those 2 data slides to put things into perspective and keep in mind that students in the past have been successful in many different areas and ways. Okay, so standardized testing. I know I took a big deep of breath about this topic. I'm sure you all did as well. Standardized testing in COVID-19 has been a very, very common topic discussed in my office, and I think discussed across the board. Testing requirements are largely unknown for the class of 2022. So as some of you may be aware, for this past class, so the class of 2021, tons of schools were test optional. Over 1,500 schools were optional, which is wonderful. Rutgers recently said, they sent an email before the holidays, it was a nice holiday gift, that for the class of 2022, so for you, juniors, they will be test optional, yay. And so we're hoping, in the counseling office, we're hoping that more colleges will do the same. The reason why schools went test optional and are continuing to do so is is because the access to testing is just so limited, right? So you might have had your own experience with signing up for a test, and perhaps the test site was closed the day before, or maybe you were blocked out of registration because there weren't enough seats. We've had that same experience across the board. And so colleges are understanding that's just not fair, right? It's not fair to hold students up to this requirement if students literally, it's out of their control of being able to do that. So we still don't totally know. It's only January, right? So we're not totally sure yet. I am hopeful that schools will continue with their test optional platform. I also think, and we'll talk about test optional in a couple slides, I do think a lot of schools will likely realize that being test optional was fine. They didn't need the test scores, and perhaps maybe we'll see more schools permanently turning to be test optional, which would be wonderful. But in the meantime, regardless of test optional policies, we do recommend that you try to take at least one. I mean, you might not be able to, right? We don't know how things are going. Things change from hour to hour, but we do recommend, if you're comfortable, if you feel like you're able to, if you feel like it's safe for you to try to take at least one exam, Let's say, because in case you apply to a school that doesn't go test optional next year or does require a test, we want to make sure you have at least a test to send. So keep that in mind. We can talk that through. Some testing tips that I've noticed in working with individuals is try to register as early as you can. Registration generally closes 1 month before the date. So doing, at least before the month before if spots are still available. But I just noticed for the SAT, if I was a student, I could even sign up for the June test already. They opened registration pretty early, I think, knowing that a lot of people are trying to register. Be flexible, understand that you might have to test farther away than you anticipated, right? And that your test may be canceled. Remember that colleges understand that, and they know that these things are happening across the board. And don't be hard on yourself. These things are out of your control. Be kind to yourself, show yourself grace. Don't overthink it. If a test is canceled, it's frustrating probably that you prepared hard for it, but that's out of your control and there's nothing you can do about it. What you can do is keep your counselor up to date, talk with me about your options, and hopefully we'll keep an eye, and I'll keep you all updated on what we find out about standardized testing for the class of 2022. Okay, so standardized testing as a whole, aside from the COVID asterisk, we generally recommend, we generally recommend that you start the spring of your junior year. Go with the test that you are stronger with or you prefer. If you don't have a way of knowing, you can take plenty of practice ACT or practice SAT tests online. They're much shorter, and there's plenty of free ones out there. Maybe you'll take it and realize, like, whoa, I really did not like the SAT questions. And then that way, you're going to stick with the ACT. I think it makes sense to stick with one. It's good rule of thumb to take definitely one, like I said, just depending on your level of the availability, your level of comfortability and safety. But sometimes it's nice to take 2 to 3, again, depending on availability. We sometimes see students take way too many tests, so they over-test. You usually see a scoring increase from your first test to your second test, sometimes from your second test to your third test. But anything after that, generally you're not seeing a big increase in your score. So at that point, you're kind of, for lack of better words, wasting your time. So hopefully that you're not, we want to make sure that you're using your time wisely and that you're appropriately taking the right tests that are available for you. Like I said, register in advance. You don't register through our office. Some people think you do. Unfortunately, you register through their website, so act.org and College Board's website. I have a chart down, the grade chart here, that goes through the different offerings of when the tests are offered. Weirdly, I don't know why certain tests are not offered in certain months. So as you can see, in March, only the SAT is offered. You can't take the ACT in March. So just keep that in mind. Don't go planning thinking, oh yeah, I'll just take the ACT in May. Well, they don't offer it, so you have to take it either in June or July. So just keep that in mind as you're moving forward. This green chart here too also goes over the differences between the SAT and ACT. There aren't large differences. Some of the timing of the tests are different. The ACT is a bit quicker, and there are also there is also a science section, on that. But there's more on our website that goes over the difference between the two tests as well, which again, I'll show you that site. And then our last slide on standardized testing, I promise. ultimately, we want you to follow the counselor's recommendations. So speak with your counselor, speak with someone like myself, teachers, about what's appropriate for you, right? We'll find what the best mix might be for you depending on who you are. There's no one size fits all answer. So over on my right here, the FAIR Test logo, I like to point this website out. It's a wonderful resource. It's been the ultimate resource for test optional schools for many years now. And basically it's a full listing of schools who have been test optional way before COVID, like before it was cool, right? So you saw some notable test optional schools on there prior to COVID: University of Chicago, George Washington, Ithaca, Fairfield. Over thousands of schools that have committed to the idea that they don't think a standardized test score should determine whether or not a student can be accepted or not. They basically are saying, we see a student as more than just a standardized test score. And so this listing has been out for many, many years, and I absolutely recommend this website if you're considering going test optional. And let's say we see schools are going back to a test required platform, definitely using this would be helpful. FAIR Test also has a separate site that they added on, or a separate page that they added on, that is all the schools that have gone test optional for this coming year. So we're hoping that they'll do the same for the class of 2022 as well. So FAIR Test is a wonderful opportunity, because just because you don't test well does not mean you can't go to college. It's just not the end all be all, and there's a lot of schools out there that recognize that. And then a super score is something that some folks have heard of, likely watching, might not have at all, which is totally fine. That's why we cover it, right? And basically a super score is as it sounds. It's a super combined score. So let's say you take the ACT in the fall, and then you took the ACT in the spring, and you got a better score on the ELA section in the spring, and you got a better score on the math section in the fall. If a school super scores, which many do, the majority of them do, what they'll do is they'll take your highest ACT reading score and your highest ACT math score, highest science score, all those scores, and combine them. So let's say you did, again, like I said, you did really well on the science section in the spring, but you did better on the reading section in the fall. They'll take that fall reading section and they'll take that science spring section. So it's only beneficial to you all. It's a great option. Okay, so as we talk about, different, building our list, different elements that go into the application process, and different elements that go into thinking about schools, it's important just to go over a couple of these different admission options that are available to students. This is more suited to seniors, rising seniors, but we want you to be familiar with it now as juniors. That way you have an understanding of the different options available to you. So as you see, this chart has two different sections. One is a non-restrictive application plan, meaning there's no commitments or restrictions to it, all good. And then there are restrictive application plans. You might have heard of early decision before. I have that red box around it. Early decision is basically the marriage of college admission application options. You are telling the school that you love them till death do you part. You will be going to that school and you're applying there, and it's a binding commitment. So if you apply to that school at early decision and you are accepted, you would withdraw all your applications from other schools and you would be attending that school. You'd be married to it. This is a big decision to make, one to talk with your counselor, your parents or guardians, whoever is involved in the process, about if that's the right option for you. And then there's also restrictive early action, which is less and less common. It isn't binding, but it can be restrictive in terms of other applications you can apply to. Again, more your senior year. But I think the most important one we want to highlight in this restrictive section is early decision, as we do get students at Chatham choosing to do early decision if they know that that school is the right fit for them. For the non-restrictive application plans, we have regular decision, rolling, and early action. These are different deadlines. They're not, again, they are non-binding. There's no requirement or commitment associated with those, but they do have different deadlines associated and different things to keep in mind. A lot of our students elect to apply early action because they like to show a school that they have a strong interest in that school, and so that can be very common for students to be doing as well. So just wanted you to familiarize yourself with these pieces of information. We'll go more in depth in that when you're a senior, and I'm sure you'll talk about it more at the end of junior year as well. Okay, so in order to kind of get an idea of what you might like, if you kind of start having a list of schools, usually in a perfect world, right, the best idea would be to go and actually visit those schools. And so understanding that we don't always have that opportunity, especially now with the ever-changing world with the pandemic. So we want to make sure that you're keeping in mind, state and school visiting policies. Some schools might allow you to visit, but you also need to keep in mind, if you're a student who is in person at Chatham, our state requirements and travel requirements as well. So sometimes your best bet may be virtual visits, and that can be done through a slew of online virtual tours, which you can see on my right side. Campus Real, UVisit, Campus Tours, and eCampus Tours all have a bunch of different schools on there where you can tour them. Each college has their own website too, which generally has a ton of more creative information. I know someone went to a virtual drive-through admitted student day at certain colleges past weekend. Like, there's a bunch of different ways that you can still stay connected and try to get to know a school from afar. So like I said, check out, there's a bunch of tips here. So check out their social media sites, follow them on Instagram. I think that one is one of the more interactive ones. They often do student takeovers, which can be really nice to hear straight from the students. Connect with some alumni from Chatham who might be going to a school. Sometimes a simple Google search or Google image search can be helpful too. I know it sounds silly, but I sometimes do that myself just to get an idea about an area and see if I would like it. Using Naviance is going to be a big resource, but really flexing the virtual options is going to be important for you as you're trying to get an idea of which schools you might like, since we don't have that luxury like we normally do to travel and visit those schools in person. But like I said, by this point in time, colleges have become very well acquainted with virtual options. They've gotten super creative with things that they can do. There are a ton of virtual college fairs that will be advertised in the next couple of weeks and months that you can utilize. So definitely take advantage of all those opportunities. All right, and then I have to throw this in there because students don't often want to talk about it, but it is super important. The least favorite combo that's the most important is college funding, right? And while, again, we're just at the beginning of this conversation, I just like to give this information out to begin with because it is very important to discuss. It's never too early to start this conversation. And a lot of times students leave this conversation to the end of their search, maybe towards their admission decision making or acceptance decision making, and they are disappointed to find that maybe they can't afford a school. So again, it's all about managing expectations and having these conversations to really help you figure these things out. So I have down here little notes on how to prepare for a financial conversation, whether that is with your parent or guardian or the people who are important in your life that might be helping you with that process, figuring out if this process will be something that you're doing yourself. It's just really important to identify this. It doesn't mean that you're going to have a strict budget set up and know how much money you can and cannot afford. It's more so just starting the conversation so it becomes an easier conversation when you get to those areas. That way you're not, again, upset based on knowing that a school may be something that's out of reach from an affordable standpoint. So it's really important to think about that and start having those conversations. Again, with seniors, we talk a lot more about that. We do a financial aid and college funding webinar, or we did that. We normally will do an in-person presentation. We did a webinar. All that information is also on our college site, which I'll show you shortly, which you can find. I put the link there too if you ever need to go back here and look at it. All right, so that was a lot of information. It's all really exciting stuff because, like I said, you're exploring, you're just figuring out things about what you like, who you are, where you would see yourself in the next couple of years. So think about what you want, self-reflect. On Naviance, there are a bunch of assessments to learn about maybe like who you are and things that you might like, personality assessments that can help you kind of self-reflect, search campuses and go through the different processes, talk to other people about schools they've heard of, add them to your colleges I'm thinking about list, which I'll show you in the Naviance webinar. Like I said, keep your Naviance up to date. That's how your counselors can know where you're at in the process, so they can see that you've added schools or what things you've done. So it's a really helpful tool and a transparent tool to help keep open lines of communication. Schedule your junior conference when that becomes available and definitely attend that. Like I said, it'll be February through April, and we'll have you complete your game plan ahead of time with that. More instructions will be sent out. Schedule a standardized test if you are able to, and again, if it's something within your reach. On May 1st, again, we'll send much more information about this as we get closer. We'll have 2 items that will be to do kind of homework for every junior. One is called a student brag sheet, and this is a brag sheet. It's basically, as it sounds, it's a document that we ask you to share more about who you are, and it goes to your counselor. That way that they can see things that you would want them to highlight in your letter of recommendation, things that will be helpful for them in advising you on your college process. And that same goes with the parent guardian questionnaire. It's kind of like a brag sheet for them to share with your counselor things about you that they want their counselor to include in the letter. Sometimes we're our harshest critics, so hearing from a parent or guardian some high accolades can always be really helpful, and to get different perspectives in helping our counselors in writing their letters of recommendation. So we will remind you, it's only January, but we'll remind you a lot about this process. And then if you have some time, like brainstorming letters of recommendation, asking your teachers, your essay to be thinking about, like I mentioned earlier. The PTO puts on a presentation with a wonderful presenter, Randy. They have for the past couple of years. We have a recording on our website, and hopefully there'll be something like that this year, but we'll look to do some kind of programming for you in regards to essay writing as well. So as I said, this is just kind of the beginning. We're just exploring, we're getting used to where we are at, and kind of getting our feet wet with this whole process. It's a very exciting time. I know it can feel overwhelming, but please know you have a lot of resources available to you at the high school. We can do Google Meets. It doesn't have to be in person. We have so many options available to us now in this virtual world that we can really help you out. And we'll send a ton of further programming and resources that will be available in the next few weeks. You can check out the college and career site, which I'll click here and show you really quickly. This is just a website that we put together. It's a Google site that's a bit more interactive. It talks about it was born out of the fact that I couldn't be in room A110, right? So now it's our virtual A110, and it has a lot of resources on here. If you go to the section over here, a lot of subcategories. For example, here's college funding that we talked about, and here's that webinar you can access. So there's a ton of resources available on this website that we'll be continuing to update and adding as well. So I just want you to make sure that you're utilizing that. Ooh, let me scroll back. And if you have any questions, email me and reach out via email, talk to your counselor, stop by in room A110. And then of course we have more webinars coming up on tomorrow, the Life After CHS for other options aside from college. And then Friday, the Navigating Naviance user tutorial, which will go more in depth on how to use Naviance best for your college search and all those other types of things. And again, that will be at 1:30, and we will record those as well. So again, thank you so much for hopping on and listening this afternoon. I know you had a long day today, and just adding this on is just a good way to get started and kickstart your process. And please don't hesitate. We're happy to help you out. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions. And best of luck to you. Happy New Year to everyone. And we'll be sending much more information soon with more information about junior conferences and everything else like that. So great. Thank you, everyone.